The Curia, or Senate House. The Curia was the oldest and most important political building in the Forum. Since the birth of the Republic, this was the site of Rome's official center of government. 300 senators elected by the citizens of Rome donned their togas, tucked their scrolls under their arms, and climbed the steps into this great hall. Inside, they gave speeches, debated policy, and created the laws of the land. They sat with their backs to the walls, surrounding the big hall on 3 sides in bleachers stacked 3 tiers high. At the far end sat the Senate President, or later, the Emperor, on his podium. The marble floor you see is from ancient times. Listen to the echoes in this vast room. The acoustics are great, and imagine the stirring speeches and passionate debates that happened right here. Rome prided itself on being a republic. Early in the city's history, its people threw out the king and established rule by elected representatives. Each Roman citizen was free to speak his mind and have a say in public policy. Even when emperors became the supreme authority, the Senate was a power to be reckoned with. The present Curia building dates from 283 A.D. It's so well preserved because it was used as a church since early Christian times. In the 1930s, it was restored and opened to the public as a historic site. On display inside the Curia are a statue and 2 reliefs that help us imagine life in the Forum long ago. The statue, with its head, arms, and feet now missing, was made of porphyry marble in about 100 A.D. It was a tribute to an emperor, probably Hadrian or Trajan. Notice also the 2 carved relief panels. The panel on the left shows people with big stone tablets standing in line to burn their debt records following a government amnesty. The other relief shows the distribution of grain, Rome's welfare system, some buildings in the background, and the latest fashion in togas.
Go back down the Senate steps.
By the way, although people say Julius Caesar was assassinated on the steps in the Senate, it wasn't actually here. The Senate was temporarily meeting across town.
At the foot of the steps, keep going and find the 10-foot-high wall at the base of Capitol Hill, marked Rostri.
The rostrum. Nowhere was Roman freedom more apparent than at this speaker's corner. The rostrum was a raised platform, 10 feet high and 80 feet long, decorated with statues, columns, and the prows of ships, called rostra in Latin. On a stage like this, Rome's orators, great and small, tried to draw a crowd and sway public opinion. Picture the backdrop these speakers would have had, a mountain of glorious marble buildings rising right up the Capitol Hill. It was here that Mark Antony rose up to offer Caesar the laurel leaf crown of kingship, which Caesar publicly and hypocritically refused while privately becoming a dictator. Men such as Cicero railed against the corruption and decadence that came with the city's newfound wealth. And Cicero paid the price. He was executed and had his head and hands nailed to the rostrum as a public warning. In later years, when emperors ruled, it took real daring to speak out against the powers that be. Rome's democratic spirit was increasingly squelched. Eventually, the emperor and the army, not the Senate and the citizens, held ultimate power, and Rome's vast empire began to rot from within.
Now turn your attention to the big arch to the right of the rostrum.
The Arch of Septimius Severus. In imperial times, the rostrum's voices of democracy would have been dwarfed by images of empire, such as the huge 6-story-high Arch of Septimius Severus. It was built in about the year 200. The reliefs commemorate the African-born emperor's battles in Mesopotamia. Check out the reliefs near ground level. Soldiers march captured barbarians back to Rome for the victory parade. More and more, Rome's economy was based on slave power and foreign booty rather than on domestic production. And despite efficient rule by emperors like Severus, Rome's empire was beginning to crumble under the weight of its own corruption, disease, and decaying infrastructure. Remember that Rome lasted 1,000 years. To review, it grew for 500 years, peaked for 200 years, and then gradually fell for 300 years. The fall had many causes. Christians blamed the fall on moral decay. Pagans blamed it on Christians. Socialists blamed it on a shallow economy based on the spoils of war. Liberals blamed it on the conservatives. And regardless of the problems within, there was always the presence of barbarian tribes on the fringes. The far-flung empire could no longer keep its grip on conquered lands, and the Roman legions began backpedaling.
As we near the end of Rome's history, let's end our walk at a temple from Rome's beginnings. Pass underneath the arch of Septimius Severus and turn left. On the slope of Capitol Hill, find the 8 remaining temple columns of the Temple of Saturn.
The Temple of Saturn and the Column of Focus, Rome's end. These 8 columns framed the entrance to the Forum's oldest temple. It dated from about 500 BC. Inside, there was once a humble, very old wooden statue of the god Saturn. The statue's claim to fame was its pedestal, which held the gold bars, coins, and jewels of Rome's state treasury, the booty collected by conquering generals. Standing here at one of the Forum's first buildings, look east out over the Forum and find a lone tall column that's one of the Forum's final monuments. The Column of Focus dates from the year 608. It was a gift from the new dominant empire Byzantium to the old fallen empire Rome. Given to commemorate the pagan pantheon becoming a Christian church, it's like a symbolic last nail in ancient Rome's coffin. After Rome's 1,000-year reign, the once vast empire had shrunk down to little more than the city itself, surrounded by a medieval-style wall. In the year 410, that wall was breached and the city was looted. In 451, the Pope had to personally plead with Attila the Hun for mercy. 1,000 years of tradition was disintegrating. Finally, in 476, the last emperor sold his title for a comfy pension, checked out, and switched off the lights, leaving a political vacuum and plunging Europe into 1,000 years of darkness. Poverty, ignorance, superstition, the Dark Ages. The city of Rome shrank from over 1 million to about 10,000. The once grand city center, the Forum, was abandoned, slowly covered up by centuries of silt and dirt. By medieval times, the Column of Focus could barely pop its head above the ground. In the 1700s, an English historian named Edward Gibbon overlooked this spot from Capitol Hill. Hearing Christian monks singing at these pagan ruins, he looked out at the few columns poking up from the ground, pondered the decline and fall of the Roman Empire, and thought, that's a catchy title. I think I'll write a book. But the spirit of Rome has lived on through the centuries, especially in the Christian religion. In the last years of the Roman Empire, Christianity had become the state religion. Senators became bishops, orators became priests, basilicas became churches, and the Roman emperor, the Pontifex Maximus, became the Christian Pope, the Pontifex Maximus. Then, around the year 1500, interest in ancient Rome was reborn in the Renaissance. And today, hints of Rome still exist in our everyday world. Our language, laws, literature, art, architecture, and science all have a basis in these enlightened people. The glory of Rome remains eternal.